In a moment that many believed would come far into the future, a quiet hush has settled over the city of Rome. The world received the solemn news: Pope Francis has passed away. For some, this was a moment of heartfelt sorrow, a time of mourning for a man who served with simplicity, humility, and compassion. But for others, the moment stirred an ancient memory, one tied to a mysterious legend that has long been whispered about behind the Vatican's historic walls. This wasn't just the end of a papacy. To many, it was the fulfillment of a prophecy, one not spoken aloud for years, yet always lingering in the background of church history. Nearly 900 years ago, a humble monk named Malachi, later known as Saint Malachi, walked the quiet roads of Rome. A man of deep faith and silent contemplation, his life was marked by devotion and prayer. But one day, according to accounts passed down over generations, something extraordinary happened. While in the holy city, he was suddenly struck by a powerful vision, not a passing thought or a mere dream, but a vivid experience that he could neither explain nor ignore. In what many later described as a supernatural trance, Malachi reportedly saw a line of future church leaders, each one distinct, each one marked by a sign. The vision, as he described it, revealed a series of successors to the papal office, stretching across centuries, one after another, until what appeared to be the very final days of the Church's earthly mission. The monk carefully documented what he had seen, not with names or dates, but with short Latin phrases, one for each of the future popes. These phrases weren't random. They were deeply symbolic, filled with meaning that would only become clear with time. Malachi's list contained 112 such phrases. Each one was paired with insights that, in hindsight, seemed to describe the identity, origin, or personal traits of each corresponding pope with remarkable precision. Over the centuries, historians and theologians alike have revisited these words, noting curious matches between Malachi's poetic descriptions and the lives of popes who later fulfilled them. Some references were as subtle as a coat of arms. Others aligned with personal backgrounds, theological focuses, or significant world events during their time as spiritual leaders. But the final entry, number 112, stood out from the rest. It was longer, more intense, and far more foreboding. Where earlier phrases had been brief, sometimes even cryptic, this final one took a different tone entirely. It described a period of great difficulty for the Church, with language that hinted at challenges, trials, and even the collapse of the familiar. According to the words attributed to Malachi, this last pope would be known as Peter the Roman, a shepherd who would guide the faithful during a time of serious turmoil. And at the conclusion of his leadership, it was said, dramatic changes would follow. Now, with the passing of Pope Francis, many are beginning to connect the pieces once more. They point to the number 112 and count backward to Celestine Roman II, just as the prophecy outlined. By that count, Francis is the final name. For those who take the legend seriously, the timeline is now complete. But how do we make sense of the details? According to the old text, the final pope would be named Peter and would come from Rome. Yet Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, seems at first glance not to fit either of those criteria. However, those who believe the prophecy has deeper meaning invite us to look beyond appearances. Though Francis was born in South America, his family roots tell a different story. His parents were both Italian immigrants, having left their home country to build a better life across the ocean. Their heritage, customs, language, and faith were all shaped by Rome. In this way, Francis carried within him a deep connection to the heart of the Church, not only through belief but through blood. His lineage, some argue, places him symbolically, if not literally, within the city of Rome. And then there's the matter of the name. While Peter was not the name he bore at birth, the choice he made upon becoming pope was filled with significance. When asked what name he would take as the new spiritual leader of over 1 billion faithful, he chose to honor Saint Francis of Assisi, a man known not for power or prestige, but for surrender, simplicity, and service. The original Saint Francis was a figure who embraced poverty, lived among the outcast, and dedicated his life to rebuilding the Church not with bricks, but with love. What many forget is that Saint Francis's given name was not Francis at all. He was born Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone, literally, John, son of Peter. In this subtle yet powerful way, Pope Francis's chosen name indirectly pointed back to the very symbol mentioned in Malachi's vision. A man born of Italian descent, symbolically Roman, choosing a name rooted in the legacy of the son of Peter. To those who see the prophecy as a roadmap, not a riddle, the pieces fall into place with remarkable clarity. The number, the background, the symbolism all echo the elements described centuries ago. While skeptics may dismiss these connections as coincidence or poetic storytelling, others believe they represent a divine tapestry slowly unfolding, thread by thread, across time. What does this mean for the future? That remains to be seen. The prophecy is not a declaration of doom, but rather a call to pay attention, to seek truth, to reflect, and to remain anchored in hope no matter how uncertain the path ahead may seem. And in the quiet stillness now settling across the Vatican, as bells toll in memory of a beloved leader, the world watches not with fear, but with faith, ready for whatever comes next. He was the one they counted as number 112, a man whose life and calling echoed a pattern described long ago. A figure shaped by quiet strength, humble origins, and a story marked not by triumph, but by trial. And just as that ancient prediction suggested, he led not during an age of celebration, but through a season of storm. Pope Francis didn't inherit a peaceful church. He stepped into a moment of reckoning. Long before he ever wore white robes or stood before crowds in St. Peter's Square, Jorge Mario Bergoglio faced a test that would shape his soul forever. As a young man, full of potential and dreams, he was suddenly struck by a mysterious illness. It began with sharp, sudden pain along his side, discomfort that escalated into a relentless fever. Soon, even the simple act of breathing became a struggle. The air that once filled his lungs now seemed distant, unreachable. His strength faded quickly. Alarmed, his family rushed him to the hospital, and it was there that life changed. The doctors moved quickly, their expression serious. After a thorough examination, the diagnosis arrived. A severe pulmonary infection had taken hold, forming cysts that had damaged one of his lungs. The infection was spreading fast, and the doctors had no choice but to act decisively. Part of his right lung would need to be removed. The operation would be painful, the recovery even more so. For days, he lay in silence, surrounded by sterile walls and the faint beeping of hospital machines. Outside, life carried on, but inside that quiet room, a transformation began. He was no longer the strong young man he had been weeks before. He was weak, fragile, vulnerable, and yet, something powerful was unfolding. For the first time in his life, he faced the reality that nothing, not even his next breath, was guaranteed. But he didn't react with fear. He responded with reflection. As others prayed for his healing, he prayed for understanding. He didn't ask for the pain to stop. He asked for the pain to mean something, to have purpose. That single experience, etched into his soul during those long nights, would never leave him. It shaped how he viewed the world. From that point on, every day felt like a gift, every breath a blessing. And if God had chosen to spare him, then it must be because there was something left for him to do, something greater than he could yet imagine. Months after his recovery, though his lungs remained damaged and his strength was still returning, he made a choice that would change everything. He dedicated his life to service, to God, to a path that would eventually lead him not to comfort or luxury, but to the greatest responsibility on earth, the care of over 1 billion souls. Years later, when he was elected pope, the world watched with curiosity. This wasn't the kind of man most expected. For the first time in history, the new leader of the church wasn't from Europe. He wasn't chosen from one of the traditional centers of power, and he wasn't part of the typical Vatican hierarchy. He was a Jesuit, a man of deep thought and simple living, a man whose greatest strength was that he looked, walked, and spoke like the people he served. From the moment he stepped out onto that balcony in 2013, he did things differently. He chose simplicity over ceremony. Instead of luxurious robes, he wore a plain white cassock. Instead of a golden throne, he sat in a simple chair. Instead of words full of formality, he greeted the world with humility. But that simplicity did not shield him from hardship. If anything, it prepared him for what was to come. The church he inherited was not at peace. It was reeling. Wounds that had been covered for too long were beginning to bleed in public view. Allegations and investigations of abuse had emerged from every continent. Victims, once silenced, now spoke with courage. Communities that had once trusted were now uncertain. And the credibility of the institution hung in the balance. Francis didn't look away. He didn't deny. He didn't shift the blame. He stood in front of the world and asked for forgiveness. He met with survivors. He listened to their pain. And with trembling honesty, he began to act. He pushed for reform, for transparency, for accountability. But the journey was slow. Beneath the visible surface of the church were systems long resistant to change. Structures built on power, secrecy, and silence did not bend easily. Every step forward was met with resistance not just from outside critics, but from within the very halls where decisions were made. Yet the challenges didn't stop there. As Francis spoke of renewal, of listening, of opening doors to those on the margins, internal tensions began to rise. Differences of opinion turned into divisions. Some within the hierarchy saw his efforts as too progressive. Others thought he didn't go